The blizzard had been howling for 3 days straight when Juniper Easton finally stumbled onto the porch of the lone cabin, her frost-blackened fingers barely able to form a fist to pound against the weathered wooden door. She had been riding toward Butte, Montana, with her father's cattle crew, when the storm descended from the mountains like a white fury, separating her from the others in the chaos of wind and snow. Her horse had gone lame 2 miles back, and she had walked the rest of the way, following the faint glow of lamplight through the driving snow until her legs finally gave out on this stranger's doorstep. The door swung open, revealing a tall man silhouetted against the warmth of a crackling fire. Juniper tried to speak, but her jaw was frozen shut, her whole body trembling violently as she collapsed forward into strong arms that caught her before she hit the ground. "Christ Almighty," the man breathed, his voice rough with concern as he lifted her easily and carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the screaming wind. "You are half frozen to death." He laid her on a thick bearskin rug near the hearth, and Juniper's vision swam as warmth began to penetrate her ice-crusted clothing. Through her blurred sight, she saw a weathered face, perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with deep-set gray eyes and dark hair that fell across his forehead. His jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble, and there was a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his hands already working to remove her frozen gloves. When he pulled them free, he swore again at the sight of her fingers, which were bone white at the tips, mottled purple and red at the knuckles. "How long were you out there?" Juniper's teeth chattered too violently to answer. The man did not wait for a response. He grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair and wrapped it around her shoulders, then returned his attention to her hands. With infinite gentleness, he took her right hand between both of his, completely engulfing her smaller fingers in his calloused palms. "I am Bennett Xavier," he said, his voice steady and calm, clearly trying to keep her focused and awake. "You are safe now. This is going to hurt like hell when the feeling comes back, but I need to warm these slowly. Too fast and you will lose them for certain." Juniper managed a small nod, her whole body still shaking. Bennett held her hand between his, breathing warm air onto her fingers, rubbing them with the gentlest pressure. After several minutes, he switched to her left hand, giving it the same careful attention. His hands were large and warm, rough from years of ranch work but surprisingly tender in their movements. "What is your name?" he asked softly, still working on her fingers. "Juniper," she managed through her chattering teeth. "Juniper Easton." "Where were you headed, Juniper Easton?" Butte." "With my father's crew. We were moving cattle south before winter set in proper. Storm came too fast." Bennett nodded, his expression grim. "This is the worst early November storm I have seen in 5 years up here. Your crew probably had to hole up somewhere. They are likely frantic looking for you. How far am I from Butte?" "About 15 miles as the crow flies, but in this weather it might as well be 100. Nobody is going anywhere until this blows over." He looked up at her, his gray eyes serious. "You are lucky you found this place. There is nothing else for miles in any direction." The pain was beginning to register now, a fierce burning sensation that spread from her fingertips up through her hands. Juniper bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, trying not to cry out. Bennett saw the agony in her face and his expression softened. "I know it hurts," he said gently, "but that pain means the blood is flowing again. That is a good sign." He kept her hands enclosed in his for what felt like hours, periodically breathing warm air onto them, maintaining a constant gentle pressure and movement. Outside, the wind screamed like something alive and furious, rattling the shutters and finding every crack in the cabin walls. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the small space. Juniper gradually became aware of her surroundings as sensation returned to her body. The cabin was modest but well built, with thick log walls and a stone fireplace that dominated one end of the room. A simple wooden table with 2 chairs occupied the center space, and she could see a narrow bed frame against the far wall, covered with what looked like wool blankets and more furs. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment. A rifle hung above the door, and saddles and tack were arranged neatly in one corner. It was the home of a solitary man who kept things orderly and functional. "Have you lived here long?" Juniper asked, needing to focus on something other than the burning pain in her fingers. 3 years, Bennett replied, still holding her hands. "I worked cattle for the big ranches down around Virginia City for a while, saved my money and bought this piece of land. It is not much, but it is mine. I have got 20 head of cattle, some chickens, 2 good horses. I do all right." "All alone out here." Something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain. "I prefer it that way." Juniper did not press further. The frontier was full of people running from something, seeking solitude in the vast emptiness of Montana territory. She herself had come west with her father after her mother died of cholera in Kansas City 3 years ago. Sometimes starting over meant leaving everything behind. As the hours passed, Bennett never once let go of her hands except to switch between them, ensuring both received equal care. He brought her water, which she sipped carefully, and later some hot broth from a pot that had been simmering over the fire. He had to hold the cup to her lips because her hands were still too painful and stiff to grip anything. "Thank you," Juniper said softly when she finished the broth. "You are saving my life." Bennett shook his head slightly. "Any decent person would do the same." "That is not true, and you know it. Plenty of men would have left me on the porch rather than taken a stranger during a blizzard." His gray eyes met hers, and for a moment something passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness, of 2 souls who understood what it meant to be adrift in the world. Then Bennett looked away, focusing again on her hands. "You should try to sleep," he said. "Your body needs rest to recover from the cold. What about you? I will keep watch, keep the fire going, and I will keep working on these hands. We are not out of danger yet. The next 12 hours are critical." Juniper wanted to protest, to tell him he needed rest too, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a heavy tide. Her eyelids grew impossibly heavy, and despite the pain in her hands, she felt herself beginning to drift. The last thing she was aware of was the solid warmth of Bennett's hands around hers, steady and unwavering as the mountains themselves. She woke several times during that long night, surfacing briefly from deep sleep to find Bennett still there, still holding her hands, his face drawn with concentration and fatigue in the firelight. Once, she woke to find him gently massaging her fingers, working each one individually with patient care. Another time, she opened her eyes to see him adding wood to the fire with one hand while keeping her hand clasped in the other, refusing to break contact even for a moment. "You should rest," she murmured. "I will rest when I know you are all right," he replied simply, and continued his ministrations. By the time weak gray light began filtering through the shutters, the worst of the pain had subsided to a dull ache. Juniper flexed her fingers experimentally and felt profound relief when they moved, stiff and sore but functional. The mottled discoloration had faded to a healthier pink, though the tips were still tender and sensitive. Bennett examined her hands carefully in the morning light, turning them over, checking each finger. His face was haggard with fatigue, his eyes bloodshot, but there was satisfaction in his expression. "You are going to keep all of them," he said. "You were luckier than you had any right to be." "No," Juniper said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I was lucky that I found your cabin. Lucky that you cared enough to spend the entire night saving my hands. That was not luck. That was you." Bennett looked uncomfortable with the praise. He released her hands carefully and stood, stretching his back with an audible crack. "The storm is still blowing. You are stuck here for at least another day, maybe two. Are you hungry?" Juniper realized she was ravenous. "Very." Bennett busied himself preparing breakfast, moving efficiently around the small space. He fried salt pork and made johnnycakes on a flat griddle over the fire, the savory smells making Juniper's mouth water. He brought her a plate and sat down across from her with his own, and they ate in comfortable silence while the wind continued to howl outside. "Tell me about your father's operation," Bennett said eventually. "Easton. I have heard that name before. Does he run cattle out of the Madison Valley?" Juniper nodded. "He has a ranch about 30 miles south of Bozeman. We were moving part of the herd to winter pasture near Butte when the storm hit. I have been working with him since we came to Montana Territory. It is just the two of us for family, so I learned to ride and rope and do everything the men do." "That explains the clothes," Bennett observed with a slight smile, gesturing to her trousers and heavy coat. "Skirts are not practical for ranch work," Juniper said defensively, though she found herself smiling back. "My father used to worry about propriety, but he gave up on that after the first year. Out here, survival matters more than social conventions." "I am not criticizing," Bennett said. "I think it shows good sense. Montana winters do not care about propriety either." They spent the rest of that day in quiet companionship. The storm raged unabated outside, but inside the cabin, it was warm and peaceful. Bennett tended to his small tasks, cleaning his rifle, mending a bridle, checking on his horses in the small barn attached to the cabin. Juniper rested by the fire, her body slowly recovering from its ordeal, her hands gradually regaining their strength and flexibility. In the afternoon, Bennett taught her a card game he had learned from a French trapper, and they played for matchsticks while the snow piled higher against the walls. Juniper found herself laughing at his dry commentary and terrible bluffing, and she noticed that when Bennett smiled, really smiled, his whole face transformed, years of hardness falling away to reveal the younger man underneath. "Where are you from originally?" Juniper asked as Bennett dealt another hand. "Pennsylvania," he replied. "My family had a small farm outside Pittsburgh. I was the youngest of 4 sons, which meant there was nothing for me to inherit. So I headed west when I was 18, worked my way through Wyoming and down to Colorado, learned everything I could about cattle and horses, then came up to Montana when I heard about the opportunities here." "You miss your family," Bennett's expression closed off slightly. "My parents died of fever the year before I left. My brothers and I were never particularly close. I have not heard from them in 6 years, and I doubt they care to hear from me." "I am sorry," Juniper said softly. He shrugged. "That is the way of things sometimes. What about you, your mother?" "She died 3 years ago. Cholera outbreak in Kansas City. It was just her and my father and me. After she passed, there was nothing keeping us there, so we sold everything and came west. My father said he needed a new start, somewhere he could work himself to exhaustion and not have to think about the empty chair at the dinner table." "And did it help?" Juniper considered the question. "Yes and no. He still misses her terribly. But out here, the work is so hard and constant that there is less time for grief. And I think the bigness of this place, the mountains and the sky, it puts personal sorrow into perspective somehow. You realize you are just a small part of something vast, and that is oddly comforting." Bennett nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "That is why I like it here. Everything is stripped down to essentials. Food, water, shelter, survival. There is a clarity to it. As evening approached, Bennett made a simple dinner of beans and biscuits. Juniper insisted on helping despite his protests, and together they worked companionably in the small space, moving around each other with surprising ease. When Bennett's hand accidentally brushed hers as he reached for a pot, Juniper felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with her recovering nerves. She glanced at him quickly and saw color rising in his weathered cheeks, as though he had felt it too. That night, Bennett insisted she take the bed while he made himself a pallet near the fire. Juniper protested vigorously, pointing out that he had not slept in over 36 hours, but Bennett was immovable. "You nearly died yesterday," he said firmly. "You need proper rest to recover." "I will be fine by the fire." "At least take some of the blankets," Juniper argued. "I have spent plenty of nights sleeping rough. This is luxury compared to most camps I have known." Reluctantly, Juniper climbed into the narrow bed, still fully clothed in her borrowed dry shirt and trousers. The bed smelled like Bennett, a mixture of wood smoke and leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her feel strange and fluttery inside. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and watching the firelight play across the ceiling, acutely aware of Bennett's presence just a few feet away. "Bennett," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything." There was a long pause. "You are welcome, Juniper Easton." The storm finally broke on the third day, the wind dying to a whisper and the snow tapering off to occasional flurries. Juniper woke to brilliant sunlight streaming through the shutters, and the profound silence that comes after a blizzard, when the world seems muffled and new. She rose and opened the door to find a landscape transformed into a pristine white wilderness, the snow piled in deep drifts that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. Bennett was already up, having dug a path to the barn to tend his animals. Juniper watched him from the doorway, struck by the capable way he moved, the easy strength in his shoulders and arms. When he turned and saw her watching, he smiled, and Juniper felt her heart do a peculiar skip. "How are your hands?" he called. She flexed her fingers, which were still tender but mostly functional. "Much better, thanks to you." Bennett trudged back through the snow toward the cabin. "The storm is over, but the snow is deep. It will be at least 2 more days before the trails are passable enough to attempt the ride to Butte. I will take you there myself once it is safe." Part of Juniper was relieved to hear this, and part of her wondered at her own reluctance to leave. She had been stranded here by necessity, but somewhere in the past 3 days, this cabin and its solitary occupant had begun to feel less like an emergency shelter and more like a refuge from the harsh world outside. They spent that day and the next in preparation for the journey to Butte. Bennett checked his horses thoroughly, ensuring they were fit for the trip. He repaired a broken snowshoe and fashioned a second pair so they could walk alongside the horses when the drifts grew too deep. Juniper helped where she could, her hands growing steadily stronger with use. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, falling into easy conversation interspersed with comfortable silences. On the evening of the 4th day, they sat by the fire after dinner, neither quite ready for sleep. Bennett produced a bottle of whiskey from a high shelf and poured them each a measure in tin cups. "To surviving blizzards," he said, raising his cup. "To kind strangers," Juniper replied, touching her cup to his. The whiskey burned pleasantly down her throat, warming her from the inside. She studied Bennett's face in the firelight, memorizing the angle of his jaw, the way his gray eyes caught the flames, the scar that gave him a slightly dangerous appearance. She realized with a start that she did not want to leave. She did not want to return to her father's ranch and the familiar routines of her life. She wanted to stay here in this small cabin with this quiet, gentle man who had held her hands all night, to keep her from losing them to the cold. "Bennett," she began, then hesitated, unsure how to voice what she was feeling. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I have been thinking about what happens when we get to Butt. Your father will be relieved to see you alive. They probably think you died in the storm. I know, and I want to see him to let him know I am safe. But then what?" Bennett was quiet for a long moment. "Then you go back to your life, I suppose, back to the ranch, back to your work." "What if I did not want to?" His eyes widened slightly. "Juniper, you cannot mean—" "I do not know what I mean," she interrupted, frustrated with herself for not being able to articulate the tangle of feelings inside her. "I just know that these past few days, being here with you, I have felt more at peace than I have in 3 years, more alive. And the thought of leaving, of never seeing you again, it makes me feel like I am losing something precious before I even had a chance to understand what it was." Bennett set down his cup carefully and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face serious. "Juniper, you have been through a terrible ordeal. Your emotions are running high because I happened to be here when you needed help. But that is not love. That is gratitude and relief and the intensity of surviving something life-threatening. Give it time, get back to your normal life, and you will see things differently." "Do not tell me what I feel," Juniper said, surprising herself with the heat in her voice. "I am 22 years old, not some child who cannot distinguish between gratitude and genuine feeling. Yes, you saved my life, and yes, I am grateful. But that is not why I feel this way. I feel this way because you are kind and strong and you work with your hands and you understand what it means to lose people and start over. I feel this way because when you smile, I forget about everything else. I feel this way because sitting here with you feels like home in a way that nowhere has felt like home since my mother died." Bennett stared at her, his expression torn between hope and fear. "You do not know me. Not really. You have seen me at my best playing the rescuer. You have not seen the hard edges, the reasons I live alone out here." "Then show me," Juniper challenged. "Tell me why you are so determined to keep everyone at a distance." Bennett stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with old pain. "I was married once, back in Wyoming when I was 23. Her name was Sarah. She was the daughter of the ranch owner I worked for, beautiful and bright and full of life. We married against her father's wishes because he thought I was too poor, too low born for his daughter. We were happy for 8 months. Then she got pregnant and everything went wrong." He paused and Juniper waited, her heart aching for what she knew was coming. "She was in labor for 2 days, Bennett continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "There was no doctor, just the ranch women who had delivered babies before. But something was wrong, the baby was turned the wrong way and Sarah was so small. In the end, we lost them both, Sarah and my son. I buried them on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and then I left. I could not stay there, could not look at that grave every day. Her father blamed me, said I had killed his daughter by getting her with child. Part of me believed him." Juniper rose and went to him, placing her hand gently on his arm. "That was not your fault. Logically, I know that," Bennett said. "But knowing something and feeling it are different things. After Sarah died, I swore I would never put another woman at risk like that. I would never marry again, never have children. It is safer for everyone if I just keep to myself." "That is a lonely way to live," Juniper said softly. "It is the only way I know how to live anymore." He turned to face her, and she saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes. "Do you understand now why I am trying to warn you away? I am not the man you think I am. I am broken inside, Juniper. I have been broken for 3 years, and I do not know if I can be fixed. Juniper reached up and touched his scarred cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. I am not asking you to be fixed. I am asking you to let me in, to stop punishing yourself for a tragedy that was beyond your control. Sarah's death was not your fault, Bennett. It was the cruelty of chance, the harshness of this life we all live. But you are still here. You are still alive. And you deserve to have more than just solitude and regret. Bennett closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for human contact. I do not know if I can do this. I do not know if I can open myself up to that kind of loss again. None of us know what the future holds, Juniper said. I could leave here tomorrow and get caught in another storm. You could break your leg working the ranch and die from infection. Life is uncertain and short and often cruel. But that just means we should hold tight to the good things when we find them, not push them away out of fear. Bennett opened his eyes and looked at her with such intensity that Juniper felt it like a physical force. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he cupped her face in his hands and bent toward her. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tender and desperate all at once, a kiss that tasted of whiskey and hope, and 3 years of loneliness finally breaking open. Juniper wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past few days. All her fear and relief and growing affection pouring out in that single point of connection. Bennett's arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the solid strength of him, the warmth and aliveness of a man who had spent too long trying to be dead inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. I am terrified, he admitted. Me too, Juniper whispered. But I would rather be terrified together than safe and alone. Bennett laughed shakily. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between freezing to death and being saved by a stubborn cowboy who would not let go of my hands. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the fire burned low, and the cold Montana night pressed against the windows. Finally, Bennett stirred and added more wood to the fire, then took Juniper's hand and led her to sit with him on the bearskin rug, her back against his chest, his arms around her waist. They talked through the night, sharing stories of their lives, their losses, their dreams. Bennett told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about learning to ride from a neighbor who had fought in the Mexican War, about the first time he saw the Rocky Mountains and felt like he had found where he belonged. Juniper told him about her mother, about the grief that still caught her unexpectedly sometimes, about her father's loneliness that he tried to hide behind constant work, about her own fear that she would end up old and alone because no man wanted a woman who could outride and outrope most cowboys. I want a woman exactly like that, Bennett said, kissing the top of her head. Strong and capable and unafraid to get her hands dirty, someone who understands this life and loves it anyway. When dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, they were still awake, still talking, still learning each other. Bennett made coffee and breakfast, and they prepared for the journey to Butte with a new understanding between them, an unspoken agreement that this was not an ending but a beginning. The ride to Butte took most of the day, the horses plunging chest deep through the drifts in places, requiring Bennett and Juniper to dismount and use the snowshoes to break trail. It was exhausting work, but Juniper found herself enjoying it, feeling strong and alive, acutely aware of Bennett moving beside her, their breath misting in the cold air, their eyes meeting in shared determination. They reached Butte as the sun was setting, the town bustling with activity despite the snow. Miners heading to and from the copper mines, freight wagons navigating the rutted streets, saloons already loud with evening business. Bennett led them directly to the hotel, knowing that if Juniper's father and his crew were looking for her, that would be the logical place to start. The hotel clerk's eyes widened when Juniper gave her name. "Miss Easton, your father has been half out of his mind with worry. He has had search parties out every day, combing the hills. He is in the saloon across the street, gathering men for another search at first light." Juniper's chest tightened with guilt. She had been so caught up in her time with Bennett that she had not fully considered what her father must be going through, believing her dead in the snow. "Thank you," she managed. "I will go to him now." She turned to Bennett, suddenly uncertain. Everything felt different here in town, surrounded by people and noise and the demands of the real world. For a moment, she feared that the connection they had forged in the cabin would dissolve in the harsh light of civilization, but Bennett took her hand firmly, his gray eyes steady. "I will come with you. Your father deserves to know who saved you, and I want to meet the man who raised such a remarkable daughter." They crossed the muddy street together and pushed through the swinging doors of the saloon. The room fell silent as everyone turned to stare at the woman in trousers holding hands with a tall, scarred cowboy. Then a roar split the air. Juniper. Her father was a big man, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with a weathered face and kind brown eyes. He pushed through the crowd and swept Juniper into a crushing embrace, his body shaking with suppressed sobs. "I thought you were dead," he choked out. "I thought I had lost you too." "I am all right, Papa," Juniper said, her own eyes filling with tears. "I am all right. I got lost in the storm, but I found shelter." James Easton pulled back and seemed to notice Bennett for the first time. His expression shifted from relief to wariness. "Who is this?" "This is Bennett Xavier," Juniper said quickly. "I made it to his cabin during the storm. He saved my life, Papa. I would have frozen to death if not for him." James studied Bennett with the assessing gaze of a father and a cattleman. Bennett met his eyes steadily, not flinching from the scrutiny. Finally, James extended his hand. "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said gruffly. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter." Bennett shook his hand firmly. "Any decent man would have done the same. Your daughter is a survivor. She made it through a blizzard that would have killed most people." "That is because I taught her well," James said with a hint of pride. Then his expression grew serious as he looked between them, clearly noting their joined hands, the way they stood close together. "How long was she with you?" "4 days," Bennett replied. "The storm did not break until this morning. The trails were not safe before then." 4 days, James repeated slowly. "Alone in a cabin with a strange man." "Papa," Juniper said warningly, recognizing the tone in his voice. "I am not accusing anyone of impropriety," James said, raising his hands. "But you know how people talk, Juniper. 4 days alone, unchaperoned." "There will be gossip." "Let them gossip," Juniper said firmly. "I do not care what narrow-minded people think. Bennett was a perfect gentleman, and even if he had not been, I would still be grateful to be alive rather than frozen in a snowbank somewhere." Bennett spoke up quietly. "Mr. Easton, I understand your concern. If your daughter's reputation has been damaged by my assistance, I am prepared to do the honorable thing and offer marriage." Juniper's head whipped toward him, her eyes wide. That was not how she had wanted this to happen, not as an obligation or a matter of honor. "Bennett, you do not have to." "I know I do not have to," Bennett interrupted, looking directly at her. "But I want to. These past 4 days have been the best of my life since I lost my wife 3 years ago. You brought light back into my world, Juniper, and I do not want to let that go. I do not want to let you go. If you will have me, I am asking you to marry me. Not because of propriety or obligation, but because I am falling in love with you." The saloon had gone completely silent, every person straining to hear this drama unfolding. Juniper felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Bennett's face broke into the widest smile she had seen from him, transforming him completely. He pulled her close and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and applause of the entire saloon. James Easton watched this with a mixture of emotions playing across his weathered face. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Well then, I suppose I should get to know my future son-in-law. Xavier, was it? Where is your family from?" What followed was a long evening of conversation, with James grilling Bennett on his background, his prospects, his intentions. Bennett answered every question honestly and thoroughly, not trying to hide his humble circumstances or his tragic past. He explained his small ranch, his 20 head of cattle, his plans to slowly build his operation over the coming years. He told James about Sarah and his son, about the grief that had driven him into isolation, about how Juniper had awakened something in him he thought was dead forever. James listened to all of this with the careful attention of a man whose only daughter's happiness hung in the balance. Finally, as the hour grew late, he sat back and regarded Bennett with something approaching approval. "You are not wealthy, and you are starting from almost nothing," James said bluntly. "But I was in the same position when I married Juniper's mother. I can see that you are a worker and that you have honor. Most importantly, I can see that my daughter loves you and you love her. In the end, that matters more than money or status." He extended his hand across the table. "You have my blessing, Bennett Xavier. Take care of my girl and we will have no problems. Fail her and you will answer to me. Understood?" Bennett gripped his hand firmly. "Understood and accepted. I swear to you I will spend the rest of my life making sure she is safe and happy and loved." "That is all any father can ask," James said, then smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "Welcome to the family, son." They were married 3 weeks later in a small church in Butte, with James and Bennett's few friends from the surrounding ranches in attendance. Juniper wore a simple blue dress that her father bought specially for the occasion, and Bennett wore his best clothes, which were still fairly humble but clean and carefully pressed. The ceremony was brief and earnest, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Juniper felt a profound sense of rightness, as though all the pain and loss of the past 3 years had been leading to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. They spent their wedding night in the Butte Hotel, and Juniper discovered that Bennett's gentleness and patience extended to every aspect of their relationship. He took his time with her, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," Bennett whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "I did not think I would ever say those words again, but I love you, Juniper Xavier." "I love you too," Juniper replied, running her fingers along the scar on his face. "You are not broken, Bennett. You were just waiting for the right person to help you heal." The next morning, they rode back to Bennett's cabin together, now Juniper's home as well. James had insisted on giving them 10 head of his own cattle as a wedding present, and promised to help Bennett expand his operation over the coming years. It was a generous gift that would give them a stronger start than Bennett could have achieved on his own. The cabin looked different to Juniper now as they approached it through the snow. It was no longer a stranger's shelter but her home, the place where she would build a life with the man she loved. Bennett seemed to sense her thoughts because he reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "It is not much," he said, "but we will build it into something together." "It is perfect," Juniper assured him. "It is ours." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Juniper's years of ranch work meant she was well equipped for the demands of frontier living, and she and Bennett worked together seamlessly to manage their small operation. They rose before dawn to tend the animals, spent long days repairing fences and clearing land, and fell into bed exhausted each night, wrapped in each other's arms. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. Bennett taught Juniper everything he knew about breeding cattle and reading weather patterns, while Juniper taught him the card games and songs her mother had favored. They made trips to Butte every few weeks for supplies, and Juniper always made sure to stop and visit her father, who was increasingly pleased with his choice of son-in-law. "Bennett is a good man," James told Juniper one afternoon as they sat on the porch of the Butte Hotel, watching the traffic go by. "He works hard, he treats you well, and he looks at you like you hung the moon. I could not have asked for better for you." "I am happy, Papa," Juniper said simply. "Happier than I have been since Mama died." James nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Your mother would have liked him. She always said you would need a strong man, someone who could keep up with you and was not threatened by your independence. Bennett is that man." By the time autumn rolled around again, nearly a year after the blizzard that had brought them together, Juniper had news that filled her with both joy and terror. She waited until evening when she and Bennett were sitting by the fire after dinner to tell him. "Bennett, I need to talk to you about something." He looked up from the harness he was mending, immediately attentive to the seriousness in her voice. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. At least, I hope you will not think so." She took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "I am with child, about 3 months along, I think." The color drained from Bennett's face. The harness fell from his hands. For a long moment he just stared at her, and Juniper felt her heart sink as she saw the panic and old grief rising in his eyes. "Bennett, say something," she pleaded. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back rigid. When he spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled fear. "I cannot do this again. Juniper, I cannot watch you die like Sarah did. I cannot bury another wife and child." Juniper rose and went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "I am not Sarah. Every woman is different, every pregnancy is different. What happened to her does not mean it will happen to me." "You do not know that," Bennett said roughly. "You cannot promise me you will survive this." "No, I cannot," Juniper agreed. "But you cannot live your life in fear of what might happen. We have been happy this past year, have we not? Would you trade that happiness to have lived alone instead, just to avoid this fear?" Bennett turned in her arms and pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. His body was shaking. "I am so afraid," he admitted. "I am terrified of losing you." "I know," Juniper said softly. "I am scared too. But we will face this together, you and me. And no matter what happens, we will have had this year, this love. That is worth any risk." Bennett held her for a long time, just breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. Finally, he pulled back enough to look at her face. "A baby," he said, and for the first time there was a hint of wonder mixed with the fear. "We are going to have a baby." Juniper smiled, relieved to see something other than panic in his expression. "Yes, next spring if my calculations are right. Around May." Bennett placed his hand gently on her stomach, his palm warm through the fabric of her dress. "Hello in there," he said softly. "You have got yourself one brave mother. Try not to give her too much trouble, all right?" Juniper laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Bennett Xavier." "I love you too," he replied. "Both of you." The months that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Bennett. Juniper remained healthy and strong through her pregnancy, continuing to work alongside him for as long as she was able. but Bennett watched her constantly with anxious eyes, seeing danger in every moment of fatigue or discomfort. James visited frequently, both to check on his daughter and to help Bennett manage his spiraling anxiety. "Son, you are going to worry yourself to death," James said one afternoon in February, watching Bennett pace the cabin floor for the 100th time. "Juniper is healthy, the baby is active and strong, and we have already arranged for the best midwife in 3 counties to be here when the time comes. You need to trust that things will be all right." "I am trying," Bennett said, "but every day I remember Sarah. Every day I see her pale face, hear her screams. I do not know how to stop being afraid." "You do not stop being afraid," James said. "You just learn to have faith that love is stronger than fear. Juniper believes you will both come through this, and you need to believe it too. She needs your strength now, not your terror." Bennett took those words to heart, making a conscious effort to project calm and confidence even when he felt anything but. He doted on Juniper, making sure she rested frequently, bringing her special treats from town, reading to her in the evenings from books borrowed from the small library in Butte. And slowly, as the weeks passed and Juniper continued to bloom with health, the fear began to recede slightly, replaced by growing anticipation and joy. In late April, with the snow finally melting and wildflowers beginning to carpet the meadows, Juniper woke Bennett in the pre-dawn darkness with a gentle shake. "It is time," she said calmly. "The baby is coming." Bennett was out of bed instantly, his heart racing. "I will ride for the midwife." "Bennett, wait." Juniper caught his arm, her face serene in the lamplight. "Look at me, breathe, everything is going to be all right." He forced himself to take a deep breath, then another. "I am sorry, I am trying not to panic." "I know," Juniper said. "But I need you calm and present, not flying apart. Can you do that for me?" Bennett nodded, drawing on reserves of strength he had not known he possessed. "Yes, I can do that." He rode like fury to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered countless babies in the Montana Territory. She arrived at the cabin with Bennett and immediately took charge, setting him to boiling water and gathering clean linens while she examined Juniper. "Everything looks good," Mrs. Henderson announced. "The baby is positioned correctly, and this one is strong. It will be a while yet, so everyone might as well settle in." The labor lasted through the morning and into the afternoon. Bennett stayed by Juniper's side the entire time, holding her hand when the contractions came, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement and love. Juniper was incredible, breathing through the pain with gritted determination, never complaining, never crying out more than necessary. Mrs. Henderson moved about competently, checking Juniper's progress, offering advice and support. As the sun began to set, painting the cabin walls with golden light, Mrs. Henderson said, "All right, Juniper, it is time to push. On the next contraction, I need you to bear down with everything you have got." What followed was intense and primal and terrifying and beautiful all at once. Juniper pushed with fierce concentration, her hand gripping Bennett's hard enough to bruise, her face flushed with effort. Bennett supported her, his arm around her shoulders, whispering over and over, "You can do this. You are so strong, I love you so much." And then, with one final push and a cry that was half pain and half triumph, a baby's wail filled the cabin. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. "A big, healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." Bennett felt something break open inside him, all the grief and fear and tension of the past year releasing in a flood of overwhelming emotion. Tears poured down his face as he watched Mrs. Henderson clean and swaddle his son, as she placed the baby in Juniper's arms. Juniper was crying too, looking down at the tiny face with an expression of such love and wonder that Bennett felt his heart might actually burst. "We did it," Juniper said, looking up at Bennett with exhausted joy. "We have a son." Bennett leaned down and kissed her forehead, then her lips, tasting salt and love. "You did it. You were amazing. You are amazing." He looked at his son, really looked at him, seeing the dark hair plastered to the small skull, the miniature fingers curled into fists, the eyes scrunched shut against the brightness of the world. His son. His and Juniper's. Alive and healthy and perfect. "Hello, little one," Bennett whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. Immediately, the baby's fist opened and closed around it, gripping with surprising strength. "I am your father, and I promise you I am going to do everything in my power to keep you and your mother safe and happy." They named him James William Xavier, after both his grandfathers. Jamie, as they quickly began calling him, was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable intervals. Mrs. Henderson stayed for 3 days to make sure both mother and child were thriving, then returned to Butt with promises to check in again in a few weeks. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Bennett discovered a capacity for love he had not known existed, marveling at every tiny change in his son, every new expression or sound. Juniper recovered well from the birth, her strength returning quickly, and together they navigated the challenges of caring for an infant while still managing the ranch. James Easton visited frequently, besotted with his grandson, bringing gifts and sitting for hours just holding the baby and telling him stories. "He looks like you, Juniper," James said one afternoon. "Got your mother's eyes, I think, blue and clear." As summer faded into autumn and autumn into winter, Jamie grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. Bennett found himself healing in ways he had not expected, the ghosts of Sarah and their lost son finally laid to rest. That old grief would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He had a new family now, a new life, and he embraced it with his whole heart. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, Bennett and Juniper stood on the porch of their cabin, Jamie bundled warmly in Juniper's arms, watching the snow fall gently in the twilight. "2 years ago you knocked on my door half frozen to death," Bennett said, his arm around Juniper's shoulders. "I thought I was just saving a stranger's life. I had no idea you were going to save mine right back." Juniper leaned into him, smiling. "I was terrified that night. So cold and certain I was going to die. And then you opened the door and I saw your face, and somehow I knew I was going to be all right." "You were stubborn even then," Bennett teased. "I spent all night holding your hands to keep them from freezing, and you kept trying to tell me to rest." "Someone had to be sensible," Juniper retorted. "You would have worked yourself to death if I had let you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow accumulate on the fence posts and the barn roof, the same white landscape that had nearly killed Juniper now transformed into something beautiful and peaceful. "You ever wonder how different our lives would be if that storm had not happened?" Juniper asked. "If I had not gotten separated from the crew, if I had not found your cabin," Bennett considered this, "I would probably still be alone, slowly going through the motions of living without really being alive. You would probably be at your father's ranch, working yourself to the bone and wondering if there was more to life than just survival." "I am glad for the storm, then," Juniper said. "As terrible as it was, it brought me to you. It gave us this." Jamie chose that moment to wake from his nap, his blue eyes blinking open to stare up at his parents with infant solemnity. Bennett reached over and stroked his son's soft cheek, still amazed that this tiny person existed, that he and Juniper had created this new life together. "What do you think, Jamie?" Bennett asked. Are you glad your mother almost froze to death so she could find us?" Jamie responded with a gummy smile and a happy gurgle, and both Bennett and Juniper laughed. "I think that is a yes," Juniper said. The years that followed brought their share of challenges, as all lives do. There were hard winters when the cattle suffered and money grew tight. There were illnesses and injuries and the constant struggle of frontier existence. But through it all, Bennett and Juniper faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each shared hardship and triumph. Jamie grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's determination and his father's quiet strength. 2 years after his birth, Juniper gave birth again, this time to twin girls they named Sarah and Rose, after Bennett's first wife and Juniper's mother. Bennett held both tiny daughters with tears streaming down his face, grateful beyond words that Juniper had survived the difficult birth of twins, grateful for the family he had never expected to have. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. With James Easton's help and guidance, Bennett expanded his cattle operation, buying more land and building a larger barn. By the time Jamie was 10 years old, the Xavier Ranch was one of the more successful small operations in the region, known for quality beef and honest dealing. James remained a constant presence in their lives until he passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1892, at the age of 68. They buried him on a hillside overlooking Bennett and Juniper's ranch, in a spot he had chosen himself, saying he wanted to watch over his grandchildren even after he was gone. Juniper grieved deeply for her father, but she took comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happy and settled, surrounded by family and love. Jamie grew into a capable young man who loved ranch work as much as his parents did. The twins, Sarah and Rose, proved to be as independent and strong-willed as their mother, refusing to be confined to traditional female roles. Sarah became fascinated with horses and training them, while Rose discovered a talent for keeping the ranch accounts and managing the business side of operations. Bennett and Juniper watched their children grow with pride and joy, marveling at how quickly the years passed. They added 2 more children to their family over the years, another boy named Thomas and a daughter named Grace, until their cabin had to be expanded multiple times to accommodate everyone. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Bennett and Juniper rode out alone to the spot where Juniper's horse had gone lame during that long-ago blizzard. It was a beautiful autumn day, the aspens blazing gold against the eternal blue of the Montana sky. "I cannot believe it has been 20 years, Juniper said, dismounting and walking to stand beside Bennett. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stumbled onto your porch half frozen." Bennett took her hand, the same hand he had held all night to save from frostbite, and raised it to his lips. 20 years, 5 children, more adventures than I can count, and I love you more now than I did that day in the Butt Saloon when I asked you to marry me." "Only because you know me better now," Juniper teased. "You know exactly how stubborn and difficult I can be." "That is why I love you," Bennett said seriously. "Your strength, your determination, your absolute refusal to accept limitations. You made me believe in life again, Juniper. You gave me back everything I thought I had lost." Juniper turned to face him fully, her hands on his chest, her eyes searching his face. The years had etched lines around his eyes and threaded silver through his dark hair, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "You saved me from freezing to death. I saved you from freezing inside. I think that makes us even." Bennett pulled her close and kissed her, deep and long, 20 years of love and partnership and shared life flowing between them. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "What do you say we give these old bones a rest?" Bennett suggested. We could retire, let Jamie run the ranch, spend our days sitting on the porch and watching the grandchildren play. Juniper laughed. Retire, Bennett Xavier, you would be bored senseless within a week. Besides, we are not old, we are only in our 40s. True enough, Bennett conceded. But someday, when we actually are old, I want to spend lazy days with you. Nothing to do but hold your hand and remember all our adventures. That sounds perfect, Juniper agreed. But not yet. We have got too much living left to do. They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, just as they had ridden through life together for the past 20 years, partners in every sense of the word. The cabin that had once sheltered one lonely man now rang with the sounds of family, of children laughing and arguing and growing, of life in all its chaotic beauty. That evening, with all 5 children gathered around the dinner table, Jamie asked the question he had asked 100 times before. "Tell us again how you met. Tell us about the blizzard." Bennett and Juniper exchanged a knowing smile. It was their children's favorite story, the dramatic tale of how a terrible storm had brought their parents together. "Well," Bennett began, settling back in his chair. It was November of 1881, and the worst blizzard in 5 years had been blowing for 3 days straight. I was alone in this very cabin, figuring I would just wait out the storm like I always did. And then I heard pounding on the door. And when you opened it, there was Mama, half frozen. Sarah interrupted excitedly, even though she knew the story by heart. "That is right," Juniper continued. "I could barely stand, could barely speak, but your father, he did not hesitate. He pulled me inside and spent the entire night holding my hands between his to warm them, saving them from frostbite." "All night long?" Thomas asked, wide-eyed. "You never let go?" "Never once," Bennett confirmed. "I held her hands all through that night and into the next day because I knew if I did not, she would lose her fingers. And even though I did not know her name yet, even though she was a complete stranger, I could not let that happen." "That is so romantic," Rose sighed. "It was necessary," Bennett corrected with a small smile. "The romance came later when I realized I did not want to let go even after her hands were healed." "And then you got married and had us," Grace said happily. "Eventually," Juniper said, ruffling her youngest daughter's hair. "But first we had to convince your grandfather that your father was worthy of me." "Which took some doing," Bennett added. "Your grandfather was a formidable man when he wanted to be." The conversation flowed on through dinner and into the evening, the children peppering their parents with questions, Bennett and Juniper filling in details and embellishing parts of the story for dramatic effect. When the younger children finally went to bed, Jamie lingered, helping his father bank the fire for the night. "Do you really believe in fate, Pa?" Jamie asked. "That Mama was meant to find this cabin, that you were meant to save her?" Bennett thought about this carefully. "I do not know about fate," he said finally. "But I do know that sometimes terrible things like blizzards or loss or grief can lead us to exactly where we need to be. Your mother finding this cabin probably was just chance, just luck. But what we built together afterward, the love we created, the family we made, that was choice. We chose each other every day through good times and bad. That is what matters." Jamie nodded, satisfied with this answer. "I hope I find someone like that someday. Someone who fits, the way you and Mama fit together." "You will," Bennett assured him. "And when you do, hold on tight and do not let go." As the years continued to pass, Bennett and Juniper's love remained the foundation of their family. They weathered the changing times together, watching Montana transform from raw frontier to something more settled and civilized. The ranch continued to prosper under their careful management, and later under Jamie's capable hands. All 5 of their children grew into adulthood, each finding their own path but remaining close to the land, and the life their parents had built. Sarah married a horse breeder and established her own training operation just 5 miles from the Xavier Ranch. Rose shocked everyone by becoming one of the first women in the region to own her own business, a thriving general store in Butte. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch when Bennett's knees finally gave him too much trouble to ride all day, proving to be as skilled a cattleman as his father. The twins from the next generation, named after their parents, carried on the family legacy. Grace, the youngest, became a teacher, educating children throughout the region and eventually writing a history of the early Montana Territory that was published to considerable acclaim. Bennett and Juniper eventually did retire to that porch, spending sunny afternoons in rocking chairs they had carved themselves, watching grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had grown up. Bennett's hair turned completely white, and his scarred face became even more weathered, but his gray eyes remained clear and sharp. Juniper's black hair went silver, and the years etched lines of laughter around her eyes and mouth, but she remained strong and vital, still insisting on tending her garden and helping with the ranch work when she could. On a warm evening in June of 1921, 40 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Bennett and Juniper sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of crimson and gold. Bennett held Juniper's hand, his thumb tracing the familiar lines of her palm, the same hands he had warmed all those years ago. "You remember what I told you that first night?" Bennett asked softly. "When you said you wanted to stay with me instead of going back to your father's ranch." "You said I was confused," Juniper recalled with a slight smile. "You said it was just gratitude and the intensity of surviving something life-threatening." "I was an idiot," Bennett said, "trying to protect myself from feeling anything. Trying to convince both of us that what was happening between us was not real." "You were scared," Juniper corrected gently, "and you had every right to be after what you had been through. But you let me in anyway. You took that risk." "Best decision I ever made," Bennett said. "These 40 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Every morning I wake up grateful that a blizzard blew you to my door." Juniper leaned her head on his shoulder, their hands still intertwined. "I love you, Bennett Xavier. I have loved you since that first night when you held my hands and refused to let the cold take them. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Bennett replied, kissing the top of her head. "My stubborn, beautiful, remarkable wife. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They sat in peaceful silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas and his family preparing dinner, the sounds of normal family life that had filled this place for 4 decades. Tomorrow there would be more work, more challenges, more life to be lived. But for now, in this perfect moment, there was just the two of them, the love that had sustained them through everything, and the quiet contentment of a life well lived together. Bennett Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1923, at the age of 68, with Juniper holding his hand just as he had held hers on that fateful night, 42 years earlier. Juniper followed him 18 months later in the summer of 1925, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words a whisper that made them all smile through their tears. "He is waiting for me. My cowboy is waiting." They buried her next to Bennett on that same hillside where James Easton rested, overlooking the ranch they had built together. And if you visit that spot today, you can still see the weathered headstones, still read the simple inscription that Thomas had carved into them both. "Here lie Bennett and Juniper Xavier. He saved her from the cold. She saved him from himself. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch itself remained in the Xavier family for generations, each new steward adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation Bennett and Juniper had laid. The cabin where it all began was preserved and eventually designated as a historical landmark, a testament to the courage and love that had flourished there during one of Montana's worst blizzards. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow falls soft and quiet, locals swear you can see two figures on the old cabin porch, holding hands and watching the storm together, just as they did in life. It is probably just shadows and wishful thinking, but it is a comforting thought nonetheless. The idea that a love as strong as Bennett and Juniper's could transcend even death, enduring as long as the mountains themselves, as eternal as the Montana sky. Their story became legend in the region, passed down through generations, told and retold around fires and dinner tables. It became more than just a tale of survival, more than just a romance. It became a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that opening our hearts despite fear and pain can bring unimaginable joy, and that true love, when it finds us, is worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of terror and uncertainty. Because in the end, Bennett and Juniper's story was never really about a blizzard or frostbite or a chance meeting. It was about two broken people finding wholeness in each other, about choosing love over fear, about building something beautiful and lasting from the raw materials of grief and loneliness and second chances. It was about holding on when everything told you to let go, about warming not just frozen fingers but frozen hearts, about the transformative power of human connection in its purest, most essential form. The Xavier Ranch still stands today, over 100 years after Bennett first opened his door to find a half-frozen woman on his porch. The current generation of Xaviers still work the land, still raise cattle, still tell the story of their remarkable ancestors who built this legacy from nothing more than 20 head of cattle, a small cabin, and a love that refused to be denied. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful blizzard, the entire Xavier clan gathers at the old cabin, now lovingly restored and maintained, to remember and celebrate the two people who started it all, whose courage and love echo through the generations, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the incredible things that can grow from the smallest seeds of kindness and hope.